Max Horkheimer is Spiritus Rector of the Frankfurt School and one of the most famous German philosophers of the 20th century. He worked as a professor at the University of Frankfurt and started his working day half a century ago like this. And I'll show you this video, and I'm sorry the quality is not that great, but I'll explain you what's happening there. Oh, there's even no volume. So the male professor enters a room full of books where the female secretary already expects him. She is asking him if he brought a lot of mail, which he denies. He tells her that he has successfully taken the pre-arranged phone call from Frankfurt and even the one from Nuremberg. He's asking her if she has already written the letters, and he is then reading the drafts. He accepts the letters to Nelle Neumann and to James Reed, but decides to rewrite the draft of the letter to Mr. Friedrich. I think this is the reason why she sits down, and she asks him, should I write in stenograph, which he affirms, and then he starts to dictate the letter. I think we can stop here. The routine of Max Horkheimer, being surrounded by written books, working with a secretary who organizes his mail, writing letters on paper, and being enthusiastic about phone calls, gives us more than a glimpse of how deep the changes caused by digitalization are, and how scholarly communication has fastened and intensified since. The question of how Max Horkheimer would do his mail today surely cannot be answered. But we see that scholars of digital universities are confronted with very different potentials and necessities. These potentials and necessities are what our project group, Potentials of Digital Media in the Academic World, explored. As you already have heard, this is our year, the third year of the Global Young Faculty. This is our working group. And during the 18 months of our existence, we had many discussions and found out that on the one hand, the different disciplines have different cultures of publication, institutional traditions, connections to new technologies, and ways of measuring scientific evidence. But at the same time, we saw that there's an overlapping interest in the potentials of digital media and a confidence that they could help us to create a better academic world. For a start, we organized an internal workshop on the potentials of digital publishing in academia. We met experts, one of them is sitting here, Andreas Kirchner. We met experts on digital publishing itself, on digital libraries and archives, on scholarly communication in social media, and on intellectual property rights. Hereafter, we decided to make our group's achievements available to the public, so we built up the weblog blog.de, the GIF blog, where we posted video clips of our workshops and where you can follow the live stream of this conference. Then we set up some group projects to experiment with and to do research on the usage of digital media in the academic world. You heard already about some of the examples. In our Zweitveröffentlichungsrecht, we just tried to find an answer to the question, are scholars in Germany allowed to make their text digitally accessible? With our project, we aimed at two objectives, an individual one and one that affects society. Individually, we hope to regain the right to make our own publications digitally accessible for an online public. Socially, we try to collect all of the knowledge a young scholar needs to make his or her publications as accessible as possible and to bring that into the academic discussion. We cannot discuss intellectual property rights without thinking about authorship, since in the Western world, intellectual property rights are always linked to the original creation of a work by somebody. In the first step, we have to strongly differentiate certain kinds of authorship. Scholarly authorship differs in many ways from literary or journalistic authorship. First of all, texts have different functions, linguistic strategies, different ways of citation, and different ways of knowledge production. Furthermore, the authors follow different ideas and especially business models. And finally, the reception of these texts is organized and evaluated in different ways. When concentrating on academic authorship, Felix Steiner has shown that around 1800 a paradigm change took place from the scholar, der Gelehrte, who was mainly the well-read connector and presenter of knowledge, to the academic author, who developed his own original argument. Since then, Steiner writes, the academic world preferred an, quote, author-centered order of texts. An author name and his style became fundamental for the quality of evidence. Whilst the authors are responsible for the writing, most parts of the publishing process in the Gutenberg galaxy are outsourced to publishing companies. And whilst most academic authors earn their wages from the state and have permanent positions, the publishing companies have completely different business models. Academics use the services and knowledge of publishing companies, and in return, they surrender the intellectual property rights of their publications to the companies, helping them to earn enough money to survive. Most of the times, publishing companies have to restrict access of academic publications to make their business models work. This means that usually a scholar has to pay a publishing company to work on and finally publish his or her text. In German, this is called Druckkostenzuschuss. And after the book or the paper is published, he or she gets only a small number of copies. Intellectual property laws support this historically grown model of scholarly publishing. Digitalization subverts this traditional model radically and brings the balance between scholarly authors, academic institutions, publishing companies, and readers in trouble. As Kathleen Fitzpatrick has shown in her book Planned Obsolescence, and as we have already heard in part, this process deeply affects academic ways of knowledge production and publication. The transformation from printed to digital publication, she writes, is one, and these are some titles. I think I have them here. Yeah, some nice titles from a chapter of this book. From product to process, from individual to collaborative, from originality to remix, from intellectual property to gift economy, and more generally spoken, from text to something more. And just to give you another example why openness and open review processes are that important, we here see a project that is called Debates and the Digital Humanities. And here the whole book is published online as well, and you can comment on certain sentences. You can mark them as very interesting and so on. And so the idea of the whole volume is, in a way, to keep the discussion in the digital humanities going, even after the book is published. You can comment on the book and you can change it in a way. But to make the open review of a book possible, to intensify the way scholars deal with text, they have to be publicly accessible. And so the question is central: to what extent is it possible for scholars to make their texts digitally accessible? This is a crucial question, especially for young scholars who build up their academic careers in times of media transition. We decided in our project group to start a project in search for answers, since the members of our group are working on the field of machine engineering, IT security, literature, chemistry, geography, social psychology, and philosophy. We needed support, and we needed support by somebody, some organization, who is experienced on the field of law. And we are very thankful that we found a cooperation partner in iRights Lab, an independent think tank based in Berlin. iRights Lab has grown out of iRights Info, the platform, which is perhaps Germany's most important news site on legal issues in the digital age. At iRights Lab, our direct partner is John Weitzman. At iRights Info, we work together with Matthias Spielkamp. And Matthias Spielkamp wrote a policy paper based on our discussions that is just published today, and perhaps somebody can tweet the link to the paper, and this paper explains nicely what I'm talking here about. So iRights Info today made available this kind of policy paper that is explaining more things about the Zweitveröffentlichungsrecht. You can find it, by the way, on our blog as well. So all scholars in this room should immediately download this policy paper. Very important. So, what is our project about? One could translate Zweitveröffentlichungsrecht as second publishing right. And this is how German politicians tried to deal with the media changes we are discussing here. The general idea of this right is that scholars should have invulnerable rights to publish their text at the latest 1 year after their first publication online and for free, open access, no matter what contracts a publishing company foresees. Politicians assumed that most scholarly publishers sell their books and magazines during the first year of publication, and that their business models would not really be affected negatively when a general open access clause becomes effective a year after publication. This is a classic political compromise that would pacify the situation. But what is the law we finally got on the 1st of January 2014? This law has undergone some changes, some fundamental changes. So the Zweitveröffentlichungsrecht became valid, but with two central limitations. Firstly, it only helps scholars who are financed by third-party founding project, by a Drittmittelprojekt. And secondly, it is only applicable for texts that are published in periodicals, which are published at least twice a year. So, as we already can assume, many, or I would even assume most of scholars are not really allowed to use this right. And is there anybody sitting here who was financed by a third-party founded project and published his or her text, or most of them, in periodicals? Stefan Winter. Great. And your discipline? Tell us. Psychology. Social psychology. Okay. So one at least, and the other colleagues here wouldn't be allowed to publish most of their text in this way. Okay. So, as we see, this change, this way, this attempt to pacify the conflict didn't really help most of us. But what to do then? So the first option for scholars is, and we already explored some very good examples of this, just to take over the job of the publisher, to install own publishing platforms, or to get connected to libraries, and to open review systems that are free, available for everybody, to control the process of distribution by him or herself. On the one hand, as we can see, in times of transition, scholars tend to experiment with these new technologies and possibilities on their own. But on the other hand, there are very good reasons to assume that there will be professional publishers, although their jobs and business models are changing. And still, it can be attractive for scholars to publish in book series and well-known magazines, and then they have to sign a contract with a publishing company. This is a space of negotiation, and our project group learned that here the best solution for scholars is to change the usually presented standard contract by adding the following clause that only, by the way, becomes legally valid when signed by a representative of the publisher. Here you have a German sentence like the author just or gives the publisher only einfaches Nutzungsrecht, don't know how to translate that, simple usage right of the text, and keeps the right to publish his publication under an open access license. And this is the best way, it's what we figured out, to really make sure that you still can publish your own publications in an open access way, but surely there are many publishers who wouldn't sign this clause. So still, there's a space of negotiation. This clause is from a paper by Rito Mans, and is the recommended solution that iRights Lab gave us, and we discussed some of them. But what about texts a scholar has already published? And what if he unfortunately gave away all his intellectual property rights to the publisher? Or in case that a scholar can't remember if he or she ever signed a contract, since he or she did not consider these publishing rights to become important one day. This is the third option and the starting questions of our final experiment. 3 members of our project group who work in the humanities and in the social sciences try to make their publications digitally accessible. We defined 16 constellations in which all publishing rights have been given away to the publishing company, or in which we had to assume that the publishing company has the exclusive right to publish the text digitally. With the help of iRights Lab, we designed an email, not a letter as Max Horkheimer would have done, to ask for the right to publish our text digitally and for free. And this is how, I think you can't read it. We still are working on that, because you have to work on that hard and to make it sure that all possibilities are closed. But this was the letter in a way we sent, telling about the Zweitveröffentlichungsrecht, telling about the situation, the contract we signed, or that we don't remember the contract, the idea that we wanted to make the text accessible under a creative license comment. This is a version where we still were thinking about what we really want. And then we told them that this is part of a study and that we would like to use the answer as part of our experiment, and that it would be great if we would get an answer. So 16 cases, and what are the results? Oops. Yeah. The results were partly expectable, partly astonishing. It was expectable that a number of publishers would not answer our request, and in fact, from 5 of the 16 publishing companies, we did not get an answer till now. But of the other 11 publishers, none refused our request to make our publications digitally accessible for free. 6 of these even answered shortly that this would be possible without any conditions. Some wrote that it would be nice if the first publication and its publishers would be mentioned on the open available online text. So this first point, positive, simple answers, I liked. He allowed us to mention the publishing company. It's a fantastic name, Westfälisches Dampfboot. Great. Westphalian, what is Dampfboot in English? Steamboat, Westphalian steamboat. Perhaps we have to think of publishing companies as steamboats. I don't know. Driving through oceans of, digitized text whatsoever. So Westfälisches Dampfboot, the answer of the director of the house just said like, sehr geehrte, you can do that. Greets. And this is very, very nice. Then we got, secondly, positive but differentiated answers. And this means like they differentiate 3 ways of the new publication The first thing is, are you allowed to make a pre-version of your text available online? Are you allowed to make the final version of the text available online? Or are you allowed to make the final version of your text in the publisher's design available online? And one of the publishers even told us, and it's understandable, but this is what you discussed then, that if we publish the pre-version of the text, he hasn't worked on that, it's fine with him. But for the final version of the text where the publisher worked on, and especially to take over the publisher's design, you have to pay something, since you have to pay the publisher's work, which is understandable. But this is a much more open and I would even say transparent way of talking with each other about what a publisher is working on the text. And then these positive but differentiated answers really forced us to sign new contracts and wanted to know lots of things, where we want to publish the text and so on. So perhaps it's even impossible to really go through this process without the help of a student assistant or being part of a project group. You need sometimes even really a lawyer helping you out. So this is the second thing. We didn't get any negative answers. We get 5 non-answers. The mixed answer is very interesting. A huge company sent us an answer, and the answer was a mistake. So we got a complete overview. So we got the whole, the email, our question traveled through the whole publishing house, like who's responsible for that, who has an answer on that, and finally somebody by mistake sent us all the email conversations. So until now we didn't get a proper answer, but we saw that even a large publishing company can get really confused if you ask back your second publishing right. So these are the results. And what is the conclusion of that? As you have seen, on the one hand, it is easily possible to publish the results of your academic research digitally and in an open access way. On the other hand, we have lots of reasons why texts have been and still are published in printed versions, and examples of intellectual property rights of texts being given away to publishing companies. Our project aimed at figuring out if and how it is possible for scholars to digitally publish their text or to regain the publishing rights of the text. In the beginning of our work, we hoped to finally be able to give some general recommendations as a project group of the Global Young Faculty 3 on how scholars should deal with the potentials of digital media and especially digital publishing in the academic world. During our interesting and complex interdisciplinary discussions, however, we got the impression that it will be difficult to develop such common recommendations. You can correct me if I'm wrong. This conference, and especially the discussion of our group's projects, is the right place for you and for us to think about such common recommendation young scholars could give to themselves, to politicians, and to academic institutions. And still, there are lots of problems that have to be discussed. Firstly, if the potentials of digital publishing are fully used by academics, those with a full job and salary become indirectly privileged. Secondly, when the production of academic texts become more and more collaborative, and when even an anonymous authorship consequently is possible, how can knowledge production by subjects still be rewarded? Question we already discussed. Thirdly, how can we guarantee the long-term archiving of research results and digital publications? And fourthly, how does our idea of what academic knowledge change when we accept that texts are constantly processing and can no longer be finalized? In 1937, Max Horkheimer published his famous paper on traditionelle und kritische Theorie. In this paper, he writes about, and I quote it first in German, die Idee einer künftigen Gesellschaft als der Gemeinschaft freier Menschen, wie sie bei den vorhandenen technischen Mitteln möglich ist. He wrote that in 1937. Thus, he wrote about the idea of a future society as a community of free people as it is made possible by the technical means we have. We are still just starting to understand how the digitalization could change our society in such a way. Thank you very much.